and will lead the meeting today. Agendas are available at the front entrance, and we've also made them available by email and online at planofacadiana.org. In order for our records to reflect your attendance, please sign in at the table or drop a message in the chat box listing your name and address. The purpose of this meeting today is to consider items established by the agenda. Public input is welcome on these items. However, to ensure an orderly meeting, we have reserved time for members of the public to speak at the end of the meeting. Each organization may be permitted one representative to speak for 3 minutes on its behalf, and individual public members are permitted 3 minutes. For those wishing to speak in person, please complete a card and present it to a member of the APC staff. For members of the public participating online, please submit your comments and questions in the chat box. Comments, questions will be read aloud during the public comment period. At today's meeting of the Regional Steering Committee 5, we will facilitate a presentation by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Congressman Clay Higgins will be in attendance to introduce the presentation. At this time, I'd like to call on Rachel for a roll call and public introduction.
Thank you, Donald. Earl Garber from Acadia Parish.
Here.
Gardner Rose from Allen Parish.
Here.
Jimmy Landry from Aboyles Parish.
Here.
Terry Freelow from Calcasieu Parish.
Here online.
Here online, Scooter Trosclair with Cameron Parish is absent. He's actually, I believe, getting married. Donald Badger with Evangeline Parish.
Here.
Mr. Larry Richard with Iberia Parish.
Here.
John Clark with Iberville Parish. John Marceau with Jefferson Davis Parish. Absent. Stephanie Weeks with Lafayette Parish. Here. Mark Ward with Point Capee Parish. He's on military leave. Matt Johns with Rapides Parish. Melissa Becker Proctor. And Matt Johns actually submitted his designee in writing as per the bylaws. Carl Ocon with Landry Parish. With St. Martin Parish.
Here.
Tim Mott with St. Mary.
Here.
Ralph Libersat with Vermilion.
Here.
Pamela Branche, ABC appointee. Here. Dr. Imad Habib, ABC appointee. We have quorum.
Thanks, Rick. At this time, we'd like to approve the meeting minutes. Please be advised that our April meeting was canceled due to COVID. So we'll be approving the committee meeting minutes from February 20th, 2020. Prior to the meeting and in your agenda packets are minutes from our last RSC 5 meeting. A motion is needed to approve the meeting minutes. I'll move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Also included for your reference are action summaries for the subcommittee meetings. No action is needed on subcommittee minutes at this time. Now we'd like to introduce Miss Miriam Belblidia with who will introduce herself. Give us an update.
Miriam, are you available online?
I am. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, y'all. How are you doing? My name is Miriam Belblidia, and I am with the PM team assisting OCD. And so, unfortunately, they were double booked today. Region 6 is having their flood risk presentation at the same time, and so they asked me to participate. We also have Kim on the line from CSRS. And so I'm happy to just provide a little bit of an update as to where things are standing with the program. To clarify, first and foremost, the role of the PM team in assisting with the program. So I work for Arcadis. We have Cam, as I mentioned, from CSRS, and we are part of the program management team that is under contract with OCD to support y'all at the regions. So my role personally is as the statewide coordinator, sort of the counterpart to Nicolette, and I'm sort of working as basically like in support of OCD and in support of the region. So what I would say to y'all in Region 5 is, you know, use me as you need. We are here to support y'all and to make sure that this program is successful. And so we want to be sure that it's responsive to the local needs, because y'all know your flood risk best. You know best what is going on at the local level and what the needs are. And we want to make sure that the program is responsive to that. We know that it's a very complex program. You know, it's dealing with federal HUD money, and that can get very complicated very fast. But we're here as best we can to support in navigating this and to make sure that this funding goes to folks at the local level, that it is in support of reducing your flood risk at the watershed level. And, you know, if there's specific questions that you have about sort of where we're at in the program right now, I'm happy to do my best to answer those. If I can't answer anything, you know, I'll check with Nicolette and can provide a written response to y'all. But I would say that, you know, right now we're at a really important stage in this program. So you as the RSC are placed in this really important role to really guide the future development of the Watershed Initiative. And I know it's a responsibility that y'all are taking very seriously because you live in this region, because you're directly impacted by flooding. And we all have a stake in trying to mitigate that. And so right now, as you're in year one, you are doing a few things, right? You have your work plan, you have your project inventory, which I'm sure that that Rachel and others have you know, already talked to y'all about or planning to shortly. You have the round one projects that we are going to probably see coming up in the fall. And ultimately, at the end of your tenure as this interim regional steering committee, you're going to be transitioning to this watershed council. And, you know, you have input there in terms of what that is going to look like. Obviously, there has to be coordination with the legislature, and there's things that are happening at the state level to give the enabling legislation that you're going to need to do that job. But, you know, I would say that as much as possible, using this opportunity to really shape the program. You know, OCD is trying to be responsive to what they're hearing from the regions, and I am here to support y'all in that. So again, happy to what I can in support of this mission. And yeah, if you have any questions specifically about some of the things I touched upon, please let me know.
Anybody have any questions for Miriam? Miriam, did you touch on the consultants that would be working with?
Sure, sorry, that was, I guess I sort of glossed over that. So yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm on the program management team. So I work for Arcadis. We are a sub to CSRS. They're the prime. And you'll see that on our consultant team, there's other folks that I'm sure y'all are already familiar with. So we have Franklin and Associates, Risa, who you may already know, and some of her associates over there. Other folks that you have maybe interacted with include Baker Donaldson, that is doing some of the background research on the legal side of things as they relate to the governance that you're going to be tackling. So they're essentially doing some of the background research to see like what legislation is already on the books. What do we need to know in terms of like, if there's legislation on the books, but it's not being enforced, like, you know, how does that actually play out in terms of some of the governance pieces of this program? And we also have folks from GCR, Wagner and Ball, and I think that's everybody for now. It's a very large PM team, but the folks that you'll mainly be interacting with will be from CSRS, Arcadis, and Franklin. We're sort of a little bit of the core team. And that's on the PM team side. Now there's other consultants that are involved with other pieces of the program, like including AECOM and CPEX and folks that you may be dealing with in other areas. I don't have as much intimate knowledge as to what they are doing. You know, we all sort of are a little bit in our own swim lanes. But, you know, there is a graphic that OCD has that lays out the exact responsibilities of each member of the consultant team. And so, you know, be happy to provide that if it's going to help keep it all straight. I know it's confusing, and I know that there's a lot, there's a lot of consultants involved. And so, you know, what we can do to make sure that that is as clear as possible, please let me know. So my role specifically, as I mentioned, is I am the statewide coordinator. So we have 8 regions, and I am trying to cross the whole state. So I know that some of y'all may be in multiple regions, so you might see me pop up in multiple, you know, I'm trying to attend as many of the regional meetings as possible. Obviously, sometimes they're scheduled for the same time, and then we have to divide up. But so you'll either probably see me or in meetings. We also have some folks who are local. So Kim is actually in Region 5 from our team. And as much as possible, we're trying to make sure that folks who are local, who are in these regions, are the folks that are going to be interacting with y'all and supporting y'all. Because again, we recognize that they're going to be sort of best equipped and knowing the local landscape. So I'm based in New Orleans, and also up in Ponchatoula. And so, yeah, I'll be kind of the maybe main point of contact. And lastly, I just also want to make sure that y'all are aware that Nicolette is going to be out on leave for a few weeks. And so you may also be in coordination with Evelyn and with Ben and Brad from the OCD side of things as they're picking up some of her responsibilities while she's out.
Thank you, Miriam.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Miriam? All right. Next item on the agenda.
Now we'll have a subcommittee report out.
Can I make maybe a floor amendment to amend the agenda this morning? As I was thinking through the agenda last night, I think it would be best if I presented the action plan first to provide a little bit of context regarding what the subcommittees are reporting out. So you can all see the the work plan objectives and the goals that we are trying to accomplish as a group. So if I can ask for a motion to amend the agenda to present the action plan first, and then the subcommittee report outs next.
Moved by Larry Richard. Do we have a second? Second by Jimmy Landry. All in favor? Aye. None opposed? And Rachel, before you start, has everybody signed in? All the public, have you all signed in? If anyone hasn't signed in, Ms. Rose can bring you the sign in.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Tomorrow at noon? Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I wanted to provide a little bit of organizational context to what we're trying to do. The way we have the Region 5 structure is we have our steering committee made up of the 19 committee members, 16 parishes, and then 3 appointees from APC. And then we also have 3 subcommittees that are all conducting the activities of the coalition and managing the amount of information that's being pushed down from the state. So we have the Governance and Long-Term Sustainability Subcommittee, Capital Improvement Program Subcommittee, and then the CRS Floodplain Management Subcommittee. If you could go to the next one. And last meeting, we asked for volunteers to participate in each of those subcommittees and to try to leverage, and we also recommended a few people to sit on those committees to leverage the expertise in each of those subcommittees. So who we have on the subcommittee for the floodplain management, we have Gardner Rose, Terry Freelot, Stephanie Weeks, Mark Ward, Carl Oakland, and Ralph Liverstadt. On the Capital Improvement Program Subcommittee is Earl Garber, Jimmy Landry, Donald Bajon, John Clark, Stephanie Weeks, Mark Ward, Carl Oakland, Tim Mott, and then Ralph Liverstadt. Then finally, on the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee, we have Donald Bajon, Mr. Larry Richard, Matt Johns, Mr. Chester Cedars, and then Donald Segrera and Imad Abrinahadi. And so these are this is the committee structure and the participants that are participating in each. And then what I'll do next is present the action plan. And so today what we have to do as part of one of the requirements from the state, we need to submit this action plan outlining the work objectives for the entire year. And this will be submitted to Office of Community Development. So this was presented initially to the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee so that we can make any adjustments and or revisions. And then be reminded that these subcommittees are not taking any formal action on behalf of the entire Region Steering Committee. These are mainly working groups that will provide, manage the amount of information and then also conduct work activities related to each of the respective areas that I'll get into in a second. Okay, if you could go next. Can you pull up the action plan? Sorry. So in your packets, we have the action plan available to you all, and I'll go over it very quickly. Again, you all have the ability to revise the action plan to date, but this is what was discussed in the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee. We did make one minor revision within there, and then we also highlighted the objectives that are required by the states and the deadlines that they have set, highlighted in red. All the rest are, I guess, rolling timelines that can be adjusted as needed, but those are the milestones that we should, by the work that we should get accomplished by that particular date. So one of the very first objectives, and most of this very first objective will be achieved by the Capital Improvement Subcommittee. One is allocating the up to $5 million in the round one project. So as we all know, there is a $60 million in competitive funds that is directly being handled by the state, and we have $5 million that will eventually, which has not been allocated yet, we'll have $5 million that will be allocated to this region. And that $5 million, the prioritization process of what projects may be applied for, we'll work that through the Capital Improvement Subcommittee. And again, the Capital Improvement Subcommittee will make a recommendation to this committee, and this committee can ratify that decision and or revise it as needed. So within the round one $5 million objective, we have activities to receive the funds, which is still pending. To date, the HUD funds have not been allocated to the state. It's allocated, but they haven't received the check, if you will. So that funding is still pending. Identify regional priorities for round one, and then select the projects to be awarded with the $5 million. So those are still activities that have not been started. The second objective is to develop the LWI Region 5 Watershed Project list. Prior to this meeting, an email was sent out to the steering committee members, providing you with a draft form of the collection mechanism by which we will collect any project. And we'll go through that in a second in the subcommittee report outs. But any project that is located in the region. So that will be distributed to any and all individuals that are interested in submitting a project, whether it's public, private, nonprofit, citizen. What we're trying to accomplish with this project list is an all-encompassing list, a dream list, a wish list of any projects that could be out there in the region. So we need to develop the LWI Region 5 Watershed Project list, utilize the project survey, disseminate the tool, conduct quality checks on the information that is being presented, identify sub-classifications and develop a classification matrix. So once we have those projects, what categories do they fit in? Are they retention ponds? Are they green infrastructure? We have to classify that information. Submit the Region 5 Watershed Project list to LAOC. That is, the deadline for that is October 31st, 2020, which was set by the state. We need then the list will be managed. It's going to be a living document, if you will, right? once those projects are submitted to our steering committee, what we hope to do is continue to collaborate and coordinate regardless of where the funding sources come from. So initially, funding sources may come from LAOCD, but there are other funding pots that we may be able to seek for these types of projects. So we want to position this particular project list to match the projects with the funding eligibility and criteria that is met with other funding sources that may become available. And then lastly, coordinate with the region on proposed, planned, and other potential projects. So those are all activities that will be conducted through the Capital Improvement Program Subcommittee. One of the next objectives is to adopt a governance and model and some type of long-term sustainability structure for this committee. So again, this Region 5 Steering Committee is only a temporary committee for this 1 year. And then from that, we as a collective have to decide what type of long-term sustainability structure will need to be. The primary committee that will work on that is the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee. And we, as Miriam said a little bit earlier, Baker & Donaldson has been contracted. They are a law firm out of Baton Rouge to work us through a decision-making structure. So under the activities and tasks for that particular objective is to discuss and finalize and adopt the work plan, which we're doing here today. Identify the governance model, which is being conducted by LAOCD's team and that Baker & Donaldson. Finalize jurisdictional and geographic boundaries for the watershed. So even though we have identified, the state has proposed an LWI 5 region, we as a committee have to determine who is going to participate from a long-term perspective in this coalition. Is it going to be the same members that are at the table, the same jurisdictions at the table, or will that geographic boundary slightly adjust for whatever reason from a long-term governance perspective? So we'll walk through those decisions in the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee. Identify options for long-term coalition participation. Then we will work with the state on some type of legislative initiative if needed, if recommended by this committee. So there's a couple of different scenarios that Office of Community Development will present to us, whether that's a legislatively created body, whether it's this one or an adaptation of some existing body that already has some type of authority. We have to walk through those decisions. Or could it be something modeled after the MPO, where the entities are participating in some type of intergovernmental agreement and are enacted to receive funds for the region. So we have to walk through those legislative initiatives and or policy structure, identify possible long-term funding scenarios, because that is the big question. Even though we set something up, I would hate to have some type of unfunded organization, right? We need some sort of funds to be able to manage the activities that are required for this region. And then finalize the coalition structure, which the deadline that is set by Office of Community Development is September 30th of 2021. So we have an entire year to walk through this decision-making process with the subcommittee and make recommendations to you all for final adoption and or revision. Any questions so far before I continue from the committee members? Next, one of the other subcommittees is the floodplain management subcommittee. So within the objective of coordinating floodplain management activities in the region, the Office of Community Development is in the process of developing a flood risk profile. And this will be presented at our initial floodplain management subcommittee, which will be held in July, and we'll get to that in a second. We will facilitate the flood risk profile presentation developed by LAACD. And then what our hope or intent is to take that information that was initially developed and then develop it further out with local information that maybe was not aggregated in this initial assessment. So we'll enhance that flood risk profile with other data sets and water control structures. And then one of the discussions that a number of people, I guess, in the community have had, and then also within the steering committee, is to begin discussions on an LWI 5 coordination of some sort of plan or an emergency preparedness plan, if you will. So in the event of an impending storm or some type of natural disaster, we have some sort of operational plan and or coordination plan amongst the entities that have some sort of jurisdiction over water control structures or flood control structures or other structures within the region. So I know the Vermilion freshwater district is a very prime example. They control a lot of pumps and weirs and water control structures all along the Tesh and then the Vermilion. But there are other structures within the region, right? Since this boundary has been expanded from much more than our Acadiana area, what other structures exist, who has jurisdiction, and then how do we get the right people at the table coordinating? So what our objective within this first year is to begin discussions on what that would look like. And then one of the next activities is to identify the best practices in CRS system. And we have one of the experts in the room, Stephanie Weeks, who does CRS program management for City of Parish of Lafayette. And then identify possible options for implementing some sort of regional CRS program. So in Acadiana, we don't currently have a CRS user group. However, in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, they do. So is that something that we would want to start as a region? And then if so, how do we go about doing that? So those activities will be handled also in the floodplain management subcommittee. And then develop the action plan for the implementation of a CRS user group. Then a lot of the objectives that we've completed to date under standing up a regional steering committee, which is identifying the committee members, which has already been completed, facilitate an initial RC meeting, develop and adopt bylaws, select elected officers. So we've done all that. And then just as a continuation of an activity is to continue to identify public involvement methods. So we've had to adjust the way we handle public involvement in light of COVID, and we're going to be offering more virtual meetings and or social media platforms to be able to participate in these types of meetings. And again, all the subcommittees are open to the public. They will be posted in advance of the meeting. We will have action summaries that are posted to our website. So that is the central repository for all of the information that we are pushing out as a committee. Lastly, we have coalition development and expend funds. That is a requirement set by the state. So once all the funds have been allocated to the region, whatever manner that looks like, we're unsure yet how the allocations will roll out, but we need to expend funds by September 2021. And then the final activity is to, again, expend all funds provided by OCD through the CDBG program. So that is the action plan, and that's what needs to be adopted today. It is open to committee discussion right now, but at the end of the discussion, if there are no revisions, we do need to go ahead and formally adopt this so we can submit it to the Office of Community Development.
And the Governance and Sustainability Committee did recommend the adoption to the
Yes.
steering committee. So if there's any discussion, yes, Mr. Landry.
Are all these dates on here actual effective dates, which you're considering the virus situation?
I'm sorry?
Are dates actually current dates?
Yes, they are current. They have been adjusted. So this was created after COVID.
Oh, I didn't see anything, and I might have missed it, about the watershed coordinator. What's the status of that?
So we're still in the process of doing another round of interviews. COVID kind of hit, and then we had to push some stuff back. We managed to interview a few people, but within maybe the next 3 weeks, month, we should have somebody at least identified, and then we have to go through our regular onboarding process.
Hey, Rachel, sorry, this is Miriam.
Yes.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing the folks in the room. So was the question about the timeline of things on the work plan?
Yes, it was just if the timeline considered the COVID impacts.
Okay. I would say, yeah, I think you answered this then, that it does address COVID, and OCD did release their updated policies and procedures, which are available on their website. If there's any questions, I would also say that, like, while the timeline has been adjusted to account for COVID, there are still some things that are a little bit uncertain, especially about the round one funding. So did you already touch upon this? I'm sorry if I missed it.
I did in the action plan presentation. So round one funding obviously is contingent on the state actually receiving the HUD funds.
Exactly, yeah. And so
Incorporated, I guess the check hasn't been issued.
exactly, yeah. And so they just don't want y'all to like expend any funds until that grant agreement is in place, so that you're not out any money that can't be reimbursed. That's the only question mark there on that timeline is there's, you know, until they have that agreement in place with HUD, they want to make sure that everything is, you know, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed to make sure that everything is going to be eligible. The only other thing that I would say related to the timeline questions is like, you know, HUD has imposed these timelines on OCD, and then OCD is imposing some of these timelines on y'all. Now, we obviously want this program to continue like at a fast clip because it's very important, and every day, I mean, we've got storming right now, it's happening, and potentially flooding. And so we want to not lose sight of the urgency. But I would also say that like, if the timeline doesn't work for y'all at the local level, that you should raise that as an issue, because at the end of the day, this program needs to be responsive to what's happening at the local level. And as we've seen with COVID, a lot of these timelines are sort of arbitrary. And so I would just say that like, make sure that this program is working for y'all, and make sure that it's going at a pace that is appropriate for y'all.
Thank you, Miriam. We have any other committee discussion on the action plan? Anything that should be revised?
Just one comment in regards to the pending of HUD funding. If HUD funding gets delayed, will we roll back and adjust our timelines accordingly? Because that, you know, sometimes has happened in the past and not always, but I wanted to make sure that we had the flexibility to move those dates back as needed because of HUD funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that it would affect the most is the projects, right?
Correct.
The project, I guess, prioritization and the allocation of funds to the projects. But all of the rest of the work activities, like under floodplain management and or governance and sustainability, outlining all of that, those activities should still continue because it's not contingent on HUD funding. But yes, all the projects, anything related to the this capital improvement program subcommittee will likely have to be adjusted. And
as I just heard her said, you know, we can adjust those dates, more so waiting on OCD to adjust those dates. So as a steering committee, if we feel those dates need to be backed up, we can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think we're beyond realistic. I think we're going to be.
Yes,
I think we need to put that on the table for the public right now. That this is not cast in stone. And I said this in February with the OCD's original guidelines. I thought, or deadlines, I thought they were being a little bit ambitious then. And I think these are a little bit ambitious, but you've got to start somewhere. So I'm comfortable with preliminarily establishing these as deadlines, but I'm not very comfortable articulating the position that we're going to meet. I just think realistically it's going to be difficult. I think the public needs to be aware of that.
I agree.
From Jump Street.
so what we can do as part of the action plan before we adopt it is maybe just amend it to include some type of disclaimer that the dates are flexible, they're pending on, they may be adjusted from time to time to fit the objectives of OCD, and just have that on the action plan.
Yeah, I don't mind, like Mr. Steve said, basically to have a goal, but be realistic, knowing that if something comes up, we're not going to hold to ourselves to that unrealistic goal, adjust it accordingly, and we have the flexibility to do that at this time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And as Rachel mentioned, just putting in some language perhaps to ensure that flexibility in your plan. Because, you know, as we're seeing things change, and the work plan, the action plan, that is for y'all. I know it's an OCD requirement, but ultimately that's that's your document. And those are your timelines. And again, I would just say that to make sure that OCD is aware of, where those timelines align with what y'all's needs are and where there might be some differences, just in terms of like understanding what's happening at the local level. And so if you ever have any concerns about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, and I can voice those concerns to OCD, or reach out to OCD directly and I can, support. We do have our watershed coordinator calls, which are monthly across the whole state. And that's another opportunity to raise any kinds of questions or concerns directly to OCD.
Thank you, Miriam. Does anybody, any other committee members have any discussion regarding the action plan?
I suggest that we insert a phrase reading along these lines. The deadlines set herein are subject to change based upon unforeseen circumstances beyond the control of the LWI Region 5 steering committee. And something along those lines.
Okay.
You put it in a motion, I'll second.
I'll make that motion that we amend it accordingly.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion passes.
I'll write that out for you, Rich.
Thank you. I think we got it on the recorder.
I'll print it out.
So we voted on the amendment to, we vote to adopt, or that's all done?
Is there any other amendments? Nope. Okay, yep, vote to adopt.
All right.
I'll move to adopt the action plan as amended.
Motion by Earl Garber. Second by Jimmy Landry. All in favor? None opposed? Motion carried.
And let it be noted for the record that Matt Johns with Rapides Parish did submit a vote in favor of the action plan.
So it was unanimous. Okay. All right, so we'll move back to the subcommittee report outs, and we'll call on Mr. Earl Garber for a report out on the capital improvement program subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you have the members showing up there, members with myself, Jimmy Landry from Boyle, Donald Bergeron from Evangeline, Stephanie Week from Lafayette, Tim Mott from St. Mary, Ralph Liversath from Vermilion, John Clark from Iberville, and Mark Ward from Point Capee. We had two meetings. One was done with video early on as we went through the COVID activities, and that was on April 24th. And then we had a face-to-face here at this office on June the 4th, which at that point, well, on April 24th is when they give him a high-paid job of being the lead. The major objective, I'd like to go over that a little bit as to what we as a subcommittee feel we have to accomplish in your behalf and bring recommendations to you. And those are develop a comprehensive list of all possible projects, and we kind of came up with Region 5 Watershed Project list is what we're thinking it should be called. Also, we need to administer the future appropriations of round one funding, the $5 million, which we at this time know that we're not sure when it'll come based on some of the deadlines moving. Develop a set of priorities to guide decisions tied to the long-term matching of funds to the projects. And, when we get into these type of things, it's going to take some good discussions, good input, even from you as committee members that are not on the subcommittee, to help guide us in this work. And then we're going to need to develop a program evaluation tool to match funding priorities. So you take the last two that I mentioned, and that we've got a lot of work to do there. We do know, though, that our first priority is to get this list of potential projects. And Rachel mentioned the OCD just sent out the program that we can use, which is through ESRI platform. And I took a look at it. I hope some of you had the opportunity to take a look at it, because we think it's well done. We had a good discussion with Nicolette at our last committee meeting here as to where and what we saw in it. She had a couple of things that she recommended that they change in our behalf. And so as a committee, as a subcommittee, we think that had it ready to go and to be utilized to allow us to get this list together. That's what projects out there. I will tell you that the subcommittee spent quite a bit of time at our face-to-face here last couple of weeks ago discussing the point of who should fill this out. And should there be just a wide open sort of approach to find out what's out there, what projects maybe are on the drawing board that I have no idea, that Vermilion Parish has no idea, maybe it's a good project, maybe it's even a project that a nonprofit has been promoting and you're not even aware of it, and maybe even willing to fund that project when they present it on the table that we don't know about. So as a committee, we're going to recommend here today that in order to meet the OCD's deadline of October, which could move, but as of right now, we think it's a standing deadline to get this list together. We're going to recommend that the project collection process begin with using this OCD form on Monday, July 6th. And the Acadiana Planning Commission will coordinate at the call of this project. If you as a steering committee see this fit, that's our recommendation, move forward so that we can build this list. It's so important to have to make good decision making on how we'll spend $5 million and many more dollars hopefully in the future to solve our watershed needs out there. So at this time, that's our recommendation, Mr. Chairman, to the steering committee to move forward beginning immediately on July 6th out to individuals and organizations. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gorman. Do we have any questions from the committee about the platform, the collection tool that has been presented?
Rachel, I think one thing that was a big question at our last meeting was the phase 1 projects that weren't pushed through the full application, whether or not those were automatically. I think we probably need to clarify that for the rest of the committee members. That if you submitted a project in phase 1 and it wasn't pushed through, it automatically goes into this inventory list. So it doesn't need to be inputted twice.
Correct, yeah. Any projects that were submitted for the competitive round 1, whether they were approved or not, will be automatically populated by OCD in this watershed project list. So that information will be also made available to everyone, so you can see if your project has actually already been submitted. So we also I want to make a comment about it. So just because you're on the project list does not guarantee that you have funding or that your project will be funded in the future. It is just to get a snapshot of all of the potential and possible projects that exist in the region, regardless of who is submitting it. So it is the beginning phase of coordinating a larger effort to compile and potentially fund in the future, but there are no designated funds to date for these projects.
OCD really wants to see what are the needs out here in our area. And so I think this is a very good tool. We want it to be inclusive of everyone, municipalities, drainage boards, the public. Tell us what you think needs to be done, and we'll take a look at it. So
I might also make a comment. We had quite a bit of discussion about that. And if you go through the tool, you see you have the opportunity to say whether or not it's you have funding for the plan or any planning been done on these projects. In other words, all phases can address in that application, in that survey. And we thought that was very important so that we could understand what projects are there. Have they already spent the money on planning? Are they ready to go to construction? Those sorts of things that we need to know as a steering committee.
If there are no more questions, we'd entertain a motion to adopt and roll out the project collection process on Monday, July the 6th.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Stephanie Weeks. Second by Mr. Ibad.
Sorry, Imad.
Imad.
Imad is, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay, Mr. Ralph Liebersat, second. All in favor? Aye. None opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have our Governance and Sustainability Committee, which is facilitated by Mr. Matt Johns with Matt had a prior engagement, so I think Ms. Rachel Godo will take that over.
So on June 4th, the Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee met. Again, those are the volunteers for that particular committee. And I named the committee members a little bit earlier. The activities that were conducted at that meeting was a presentation on the action plan, which we just adopted. And then I facilitated the presentation. The subcommittee made a few recommendations, which were all annotated in the revised action plan that you see here today. And then we made a recommendation here to the committee. And then lastly, one of the other major objectives of that meeting was to introduce Baker and Donaldson, which is the law firm that is contracted by LAOCD to walk us through a governance decision-making process. So they've already to date outlined the number of I think it was 400 maybe authorities that have some sort of control over watershed efforts, whether it's control structures or some type of authority. So there's about 400 that exist within the region, and they'll make a presentation a little bit later to, I guess, the entire committee. But there are quite a few that have some sort of authority and or ability to control some of the efforts in watershed planning within the region. So there's 400. Some of them overlap. And then we'll get a better breakdown of who those authorities are, whether it's a parish or governing a drainage board, a levee board. So they've outlined all that for us to date. It was a very preliminary presentation, but they'll continue to walk us through the entire structure. And I also want to say this. So even though we have our volunteers on the subcommittees, any of the subcommittees or subcommittee members are welcome to attend any of the other subcommittees and potentially participate in those discussions. So I don't want you all to feel included, but as we move this thing forward, there are a lot of meetings. So that is the way that we try to streamline it, is just assigning people to certain areas or getting them to volunteer for certain areas. So yes, the committees are open and available for anybody to attend. And that was the major objectives that we accomplished in our last Governance and Sustainability Subcommittee.
All right.
Rachel, could I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So I'm sure that y'all are already thinking through this and that folks from our team on Baker Donaldson are thinking about this, but when it comes to the work of your RD in general, and then how it relates specifically to these decisions about governance and about projects, I would encourage y'all to think through very clearly and put in writing, what are your goals and objectives for this program? Because there's program goals and objectives that CD has articulated. And, you know, there's obviously like alignment there in terms of what y'all are hoping to achieve at the regional level, but there also may be some differences. And I would encourage y'all to think really clearly about what you're hoping to get out of the Watershed Initiative. Like what are your goals? What are your values that you're bringing to the program? For example, one of OCD's values is transparency. And so then there's questions about like, how do you operationalize some of these values, and how do you really stay on track, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to meet our goals? And so I would just offer that, like, if there's anything that I can do to support, if y'all are interested in actually doing an exercise around like, you know, sort of goals and values setting, just so that you have that as leverage potentially to say, look, this is what we need to get out of this program. This is what's important to us, is just maybe something to consider.
Okay, thank you, Miriam.
So we adopted the action plan.
Yes, we have the floodplain management.
Okay, so next will be our floodplain management subcommittee report out, and that'll be Ms. Stephanie Weeks.
So it had been discussed early on when COVID first started that we would postpone the subcommittee meetings for floodplain management. And it's floodplain management and CRS. And I know you've thrown around CRS kind of, and some people may not be familiar with it. So if you're curious what it is, I have some handouts here that kind of explain the whole program. But it's a great program. It's really great for the community and for all the, for the public. So that meeting is going to be July the 16th. So shortly at our next RSC meeting, I'll have an update about that first initial meeting. So we haven't met yet.
All right. Thank you. All right. Next will be updates. Rachel?
Just some quick updates about next meetings to be looking for. Our next Region 5 steering committee is August 20th at 10 a.m. Our initial floodplain management subcommittee is July 16th at 10 a.m. And then the capital improvement subcommittee and governance and sustainability subcommittees may be considered for late July. We're still trying to work out those dates. But again, everything will be posted to our website and the notifications will be sent out in advance of the meeting regarding the actual dates. But what we hope to do, because COVID got us a little bit off track, is create a set of meetings for the entire year. So we are working on that. And once those are finalized, we'll post those to the website. The steering committee meetings have been set for the year, but the subcommittee meetings are still being finalized. And again, once those are set, they'll be made available on our website.
All right. Thank you.
To clarify, is the floodplain management subcommittee the 15th or 16th?
It's the 16th. I'm sorry. On the agenda, it does say the 15th, but it is the 16th.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, well, now we can move into our public comments portion of the meeting. And I do have two speakers here present in the room who want to talk. Do we have anyone on the line with any comment or question?
No. I'll double check this chat.
Okay, so we have Mr. Dave Dixon, who would like to speak. I think but that's going to be on the next phase, I guess. I believe Mr. Dixon wants to speak on the Vermilion River dredging. Is that correct?
Right, but that's after the corporate.
Right. Okay. All right. And Mr. Jeffrey Swanson.
That's after the full.
You'll be after the okay.
Harold Chaplin. Just I commend you for the efforts that you bring about, but I want to mention that in all these processes of identifying projects, there are other sources of funds beyond this Louisiana Watershed Initiative. Some of the parishes have funding, like St. Martin. And some of the things they're doing has multi-parish benefits. So those other parishes should support St. Martin in their efforts. The Lafayette Basin program is now funded to quickly. And they cover the watershed from Old River to Lafayette Bay. And it's the historical basin, not just what's in the levee system. So it includes Lake Red, Lord, Lake Oakley, Lake Lost Point, you name. And there are certainly opportunities to improve water quality and flood control at the same time. This was done at Henderson, and which Justice helped. We put together a meeting with about 30 people, of all parishes was there, and came up with a plan for Henderson. And that's funded, that's moving forward. It's both water quality and flood control. And then we have the Wild Growth Fund. If you can tie, like Lake Martin, St. Martin Parish is working on that. If you can tie the flood control issue to water quality and fisheries enhancement, you can get Wild Growth funding. And Lake Martin is an example. It's 2,100 acres. You can drain it 10 feet if you have gates that are adequate to drain it quickly. That both helps fisheries, it kills all kinds of aquatic plants, but it also gives you enough surface acre feet to lower cypress out of almost a foot. So as you come up with these projects, keep in mind, beyond the HUD funding, there are other sources that are quite available.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. I don't have any cards, right now, so, we're a little ahead of schedule. Very good. Do we want to recess, or Monique, would you like, are you ready to introduce our next?
Recess.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
5-minute recess?
5 minute recess.
All right. Committee is recessed for 5 minutes.
You buddy.
Is there bullet it off
Say a little stuff.
Colonel would not release until some of the rules.
So I think comes to a board meeting in Lafayette. We got $40 billion worth of projects. Good. Another $11 million.
No, that's good on Shane. And we continue, in fact, this at a conference meeting yesterday at 4 o'clock with division on backwater. And that is moving along. There'll still be intent to come in there.
Good deal. Do that.
How you doing? Good.
The first time I went right, I went to there. I said, what are we doing now? But, it's actually, they're still buying. I wonder if they look at some of those. I find it small. People turn the water up. Not full. Okay, we'll call the committee back to order.
Hey, are we ready to get started?
Okay, we'll call the committee back to order. At this time, I'll call on Ms. Monique Boulay to introduce our next speaker.
Hello, and thank everybody. I want to start by thanking Rachel and for thanking the steering committee for all of the work you're doing and how serious you're taking it. At the beginning, I said how excited I was for the diversity of talent and skill set and knowledge that we're bringing together. And I'm actually not just excited, but very impressed. I think we're going to get some really good things that have long-term sustainability for this region out of all of your work. And so thank you. And again, thank Rachel. I think everybody appreciates her capacity in this and her ability to really put some forward motion in place, which is what we all want. Today, we are going to take a turn from our committee work and some time ago, Congressman Higgins requested money to look at the dredging the Vermilion River. That is a project that impacts a lot of people. As a layperson who lives on the river, we watch it go up and down, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, and we don't really understand it. And I think a lot of people might get there's some frustration because, you know, certainly we can fix this. Certainly there's a simple answer. Well, one of the things I've learned through this entire process from 2016 to today is that there is science that can be applied in a watershed. There is data that can be analyzed, and that those mathematical processes are very well established and very effective. They're not cheap, and we've never truly made an investment in the entire watershed to understand how the water flows in and out of our major waterways, in and out of the tributaries. It is something the state is doing. We all know that. Part of this $1.2 billion, we will have a $20 million model in our Region 5 to look at projects, to go through all of this project list. What happened with the Vermilion Dredge project was funds were identified, the Corps was engaged, and we had the opportunity to, I guess, learn more about the Vermilion River. And so today I want to thank Congressman Higgins, because this project is one of the projects in the forefront that we're looking at from a data-driven perspective, which is where we have to go. We have to stop making gut reactions or not gut reactions. That's not really fair. But today a project is analyzed in its footprint, and then I think it's 1,000 feet up and down of its footprint. It's not analyzed on its entirety of impact. And so we have to get to that point where we're looking at the entirety of impact of a project. So that we can sit at the table with multiple parishes, knowing we are considering everything. And so Congressman Higgins' initial request was very, I guess, proactive in that, and I want to thank him for that. And I want to introduce him and let him come up and talk a little bit about this.
Thank you, ma'am.
So God bless you one and all. Thank you for being here. We had planned to have this meeting earlier, however, God had other plans, and we are on the journey through that challenge at this time. So bless each of you for your family struggle, your business struggle. We stand together as a state, and our path forward will be as one. And the same can be said about this journey to determine exactly what is the best course of action for the water management of our community in South Louisiana and across the entire state, how we can work together as a community, as a region, with Baton Rouge, who's obviously responsible for addressing the needs of the entire state. And this is where brotherhood comes in. You know, this is where families join together and parishes meet and arrive at conclusions that based upon some consensus of the science. And we have the right to question the science. All of us have our interpretations, and we've listened to many various opinions about the modeling that was done. It was done at a great deal of expense and very focused with no predetermined conclusion in mind. And that science was presented to us earlier this year. The results being, contrary to what some of us, quite frankly, thought the results would be. And yet this is the reality. We have to accept the science at its given value, and then allow for broad discussion and further study based upon the questions of the citizens that are impacted. This is completely appropriate, and I believe that this is representative government at its best when we can meet and come together over a challenging topic, and one that is replete with varied opinions, and have the common goal of arriving at one answer. We arrive at one answer that we can all nod our head about, and we'll get that done. We shall accomplish that goal. We've come a long way. I think we can all agree regarding tackling the problem. But it's a difficult tackle because it has presented some questions that we had not considered prior to the deep scientific study and modeling that was done with the combined efforts of the Corps of Engineers present today and the UL scientists. So as a community, as elected officials, we're responsible for the citizens that we serve. And this means we must come to a common conclusion regarding what's best for South Louisiana, for Acadiana, for the Vermilion, and how that would impact the state as a whole and tie together with larger plans. So we're going to stay in this conversation. Some days will be more comfortable than others, but I do have faith that we will together arrive at the very best answers regarding how to address potential flooding from heavy water events, and we'll make the right moves as a community and as a state. So meetings like this are important. Obviously, the attendance is reflective of that. We're all very serious about it, and I look forward to listening over the course of the next hour. I have a hard exit at 12:30. I'm getting directly on the plane. We have votes in DC tomorrow and Thursday. And as you know, perhaps you don't know, but I do not participate in proxy voting. I believe it's unconstitutional. Therefore, I'm one of the guys bouncing back and forth from DC to home. So I'm getting directly on the plane. I apologize for my hard exit at 12:30. So without further ado, let us move forward, shall we not? Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Higgins. Next up, I'm going to introduce the Corps of Engineers. Mark Wingate is here. And first, I do want to thank the Corps. I think they often get the brunt of all blame. They have a big job, and it does impact all of our lives. But I will say this, that they are very open. They answer every call. They return every call. They will sit and explain things to us at any given point in time. And so I do want to thank them because I think it's invaluable. And I also want to thank them because they are partnering with the state as we move forward in the data analysis and the modeling that's going to happen. So I think we will all be on the same page, or at least closer to the same page as we move forward. And I do want to thank them for that and for being such a strong partner in all of this. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mark Wingate. Thank you.
All right, I saw Student of the Year folder up there, Dr. Before I get going, thanks Monique, and thanks for allowing us to be here with you all this afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done over the last year plus on the Vermilion River. Jeff Orisco, one of our senior project managers, is going to get into a little bit more of the detail, and Dr. Habib's going to also talk about some of the work that he's done as part of our team. But I just wanted to leave you all with a few comments and a little bit kind of how we got here, why the Corps was involved in this. But before I do that, we couldn't be here without recognizing a number of the members on our team. So I would characterize it, the work that we did at the Corps was not just the Corps, it was really a team of teams. And so certainly Congressman Higgins' staff, I got to know both John Chotan and Greg Ellis pretty well. Okay, so they were certainly part of that team. ULL, we could not be here without the work that they've done. Believe it or not, I actually received quite a few phone calls from stakeholders. I see some of them in the ring. Hey, Mr. Scheffler, how you doing? And Mr. Dixon. And so we received all that input. So that helped inform. I actually received a couple of calls from parishes. So Vermilion, Lafayette, St. Martin, and others. So that was very informative to help shape how we were doing this work. LWI, as well as the Acadiana Planning Commission. So again, a team of teams, and I hope that that team will continue along this journey that the Congressman spoke about. So I recall walking into a meeting in Lafayette Parish probably about 2 to 2.5 years ago. Forgive me, I don't recall the exact date, but there I was, I'm standing against the wall, and I think Mr. Shepler was up at the front, and somehow my name came up, and so, hey Mark, why don't you come chat with us a little bit? And the conversation, as I recall, was trying to address flood risk management in Lafayette Parish. And the conversation seemed to turn towards dredge the Vermilion River. And of course, like always, I raised my hand and said, you know, we could probably do that. The Corps of Engineers is authorized to dredge the Vermilion River, and we are. We've been authorized to dredge the river, Jeff, since when? Yeah, it's probably dating back to the 20s or 30s we've been authorized to dredge. We've only dredged the river one time, it was just for a small piece. But we are authorized to dredge the river. So I raised my hand and I said, I'll tell you what, if the local governments want to push this, I can certainly go ahead and request money to dredge the Vermilion River. At the same time, Congress was working on a bill, a supplemental spending bill for 2018 called the Bipartisan Budget Act. So I said, you know, I'll go ahead and see if there's any opportunities within that supplemental spending bill to put a line item in there for the Vermilion River. Well, I can tell you the next day I started receiving a lot of phone calls. That's some of that stakeholder feedback that helps shape the direction that we go. And that kind of brings a point. The Corps doesn't just do what the Corps wants to do. We do what we need to do. And it's really a collective effort. So I received phone calls from Lafayette, but I really was receiving phone calls from the folks in Vermilion Parish and Abbeville saying, what's going to happen if you dredge the river upstream? Will it negatively impact folks downstream? You know, that's a very good question. I have my hunch, but my hunch really doesn't matter. It's really what will the science and the engineering show us. So I made a commitment at that time. The Corps will not budget for dredge funds until we know what the impacts will be from dredging the river. I'll make that commitment. We will not request money and potentially harm someone without doing the necessary science and engineering. So that really led us to the intent of this effort. We were able to find some dollars, and we went ahead and we conducted an analysis on the Vermilion River. What would happen if we dredged? And we wanted to understand those impacts. And so we really focused on what I would call large-scale dredging. We didn't focus on specific location here, location there. We went large-scale because if we saw impacts from large-scale, that would give us some idea if you started dredging a little less here or there. You know, there's many permutations where you could dredge on the river, so we went large-scale. We actually did two different scenarios. One scenario, we dredged the entire river essentially from Lafayette Parish down to Vermilion Bay, to our authorized dimension. And we felt that would give us the greatest impacts, both positive and negative, and at least show us how the water surface profile or the water surface elevations during a flood event would respond if, in fact, we dredged that river the entire dimension and the entire length. Of course, recognizing that could be costly, we didn't know what the cost would be at that time because you don't know the quantities until we start doing the analysis. We said, let's do another scenario. we'll primarily focus our dredging in Lafayette Parish. I think about a 20, maybe a 20-mile type reach. So we'll focus, we'll do another scenario, just dredge in the Lafayette Parish area and see how the river responds. Anywhere along the Vermilion River, all the way from Bayou Fuchillet down to Bayou Fuchillet at the very top at the head, all the way down to Vermilion Bay. Okay, that was the idea. So to cut to the chase, what was the outcome of that analysis? Well, the reality is, or what we saw from the science and engineering, there was very little impact from dredging the river for the entire reach as well as a 20-mile reach. Very little impact. Very little impact in a negative sense. We didn't really see any negative impact to speak of, but unfortunately, we just didn't see much positive impact to speak of either for that entire dredging scenario. What we did also recognize is the volume of material that we would have to remove for those scenarios. And it's a considerable amount of material that would have to be removed. And of course, when I say considerable, that means considerable dollars as well. Even if we went with a partial dredge, we were speaking about anywhere from around $50 million all the way upwards of the full scale to about $150 million. So when we're making those kind of investment decisions, it kind of comes back to what are the benefits, you know, what are the stage lowerings? And again, we just don't see a whole lot of stage lowering. We saw some, but it was fairly modest. And of course, that's decisions to be made. Is it worth the investment? And of course, that was beyond the analysis we were working on, but we had some conversation on that back in February of this year when we last met to go over the results. In addition to the cost, as part of that cost estimate, of course, if the federal government comes in and dredges as authorized, the federal government is not the entire team. So we go back to the local sponsor. Who's the local sponsor? It's Lafayette Parish and it's Vermilion Parish. So if we're dredging in Lafayette Parish has to bring the land to the table. Why do I need land if I'm dredging in the river? Well, I've got to put that material somewhere. So we're dredging and we're scooping up debris. From our 1998 dredging example, we know firsthand it's not necessarily clean, easy sediment to remove from the river. So we have to have disposal areas. And that's a responsibility of Lafayette Parish to provide that land to dispose on. And it would be a considerable amount of land, as well as if we're dredging in Vermilion. Vermilion Parish would be responsible for acquiring that land to dispose of. So not only is it high cost, but there's also some responsibilities in terms of land and of course all the environmental permits. If you're going to dispose of this material on some land, we've got to make sure it's appropriate. So we reviewed this information with the team, with LWI, with Congressman Higgins, with the parishes in February. And ultimately where the conversation went to is, okay, Mark, that's great. You've done your analysis. You've showed us what the results are. Dr. Habib walked us through it in great detail. Where do we go to next? And it seemed at that time the conversation really trended towards, as discussed a little bit ago, water management in the Acadiana area. How do we really get after flood risk management? Some of the modeling that Dr. Habib showed us in February, I started looking at other ideas. Things like natural sump areas, what I refer to as the Bayou Tortue Swamp or the Cypress Island Swamp. Could we facilitate to get water into that and actually store the water before an event? We also discussed maybe some targeted dredging associated with other drainage or flood risk management features. I'm not suggesting today that dredging is not part of the solution. What I am here telling you is based on the analysis that we've done. If the only thing you're going to focus in on is large-scale dredging along the Vermilion River with the intent to reduce flooding in Lafayette Parish, the Acadiana area, and surrounding parishes, that's probably not the answer, and you've got to look for other solutions. So when we wrapped up the meeting in February, the idea was really to address widespread flood risk management solutions in a different forum. Again, the Corps' analysis here was to determine if you dredge the Vermilion, what would the impacts be? And we've done that. But now this group collectively needs to move forward and look large scale. And I think we'll hear more about that as we move forward. Again, a different forum for the Acadiana region is how we wrap that meeting up. So Monique, that concludes my comments. Pending any questions? If there's no questions, or if that's not the appropriate time at this point, you can go to the Dr. Habib, I believe, would be next.
thank you for working really hard. I think the committee should also know that Mark didn't just start at that 2.5-year meeting. I want to put it out there and thank you for in 2014 in August, working with the different cities and with Lafayette Parish to fund the $100,000 for the Lafayette Parish area-wide drainage plan. And I would like to comment that I'd hope with this analysis that we also go back to that and look at some of the things that were recommended. That is a core study. But with regards to the study that was done, and I know they say it was marginal. Okay, so from a hydraulic standpoint, and in the areas where it said that it brought down almost a half a foot on some areas. So when we looked at that study and said only about 100 structures were helped, was that only on the Vermilion River, or was that also adjacent to every tributary? Because of course I see numbers and I see charts that say 5,000 people flooded in Lafayette. Well, 5,000 people didn't flood in Lafayette just along the Vermilion River. So I guess what I want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, and it might be something that Dr. Habib has to answer, but you know, as a civil engineer, you know that if you have a tailwater that changes a half a foot, and everybody's designing every one of those channels and subdivisions associated with that, that you could have any one of those channels, like I see, you know, there's benefit around Anson Cooley, there's benefit around Cooley-Ildacon. These are areas that are growing right now. A half a foot means a lot. So did we look, because we have a pretty robust model, did we look and see that when you have that half a foot, what is that doing to the other channels, and did it say flooding on those channels? And then also the duration. Again, when you do modeling, it's going to give you that maximum water surface elevation. They may not all occur at the same time. So did we also go back in there and look at duration? And the answer may be no. And so if it is, I'd like for us to explore that again as we're trying to do it, not necessarily to say that we're going to dredge it tomorrow, but so that people do understand the impacts of a little bit or a lot of sediment along the Vermilion, and also how they all work together. Because I think that's the whole thing with watershed management, anything you do to slow it down. But I really would like to know what the answers were on the duration. And also, did we take those back to the channels? Because a half a foot is a huge difference when you're in a home. If you can bring the tailwater down and it can drain out faster, a half a foot means that in a home means the difference between being in and out of your home 2 or 3 months compared to 9 months to a year. Once you hit after 4 or 5 inches, everything's coming out. So I just want to make sure, again, my study shows that, again, I don't believe that that's the only answer. We have to do several things, but I just want to make sure that when we're for the public, because I know a lot of people still, again, want that answer, have we answered the secondary impacts of what that half a foot could be? And then I saw that we did a 10-year study, and I think one of the other things we're seeing, again, if we take our step back from the 100-year with the 2016 flood or 1,000, whatever you want to call it, we are seeing issues on these higher intensity, short durations. So a 10-year, again, is still going to take it out over 24 hours. Are we looking at what the help is when we have these 5 to 6 inch rain events in less than 12 hours? So those are just some things that I want to put out there that if we didn't look at, if we could possibly figure out a way to fund that. The model's there. It's looking at different scenarios to run it. I'm not, you know, if all of these channels are in there, just something that put another lens on things, because a lot of things don't help the 100-year. I'll be the first person to say that in all the modeling. That sometimes your critical storm event that's causing a lot of problems could be a different storm event than that. So I just put that out there.
Okay, so I suspect Dr. Habib's going to cover some of that. Again, I'll remind you, the modeling that we set up was, I say simple, no analysis is simple. Nothing in life is simple. But our intent was to determine if we dredged the Vermilion, what would the impacts be? We were fortunate that when we partnered with ULL, they had a fairly extensive model already developed. So there was no reason to repeat that. It's fortunate that their model had many of the coulees already in the model. So when we ran the dredge templates down to Vermilion, yes, you could see the change in water surface profile up the coulees, And then from there, you could see what homes were benefited from that. So we were only able to do that because ULL had previously made investments in modeling. So some of that Pam was able to be determined. And I'll let Dr. Habib get into the H&H details because it's been many years since I've done that.
Can I address some of the comments Mr. Belblidia made?
Because we're still in the format of the regional steering committee, we're going to hold our public comments to the end of the presentation and for the sake of the congressman's time.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll take this off. Okay. I'll switch the you're right, it was that student for you. That's my son. He was a student for you for the parish, so it's, thank you. He did not get his celebration. So I tried to advertise his account. Okay, so let me see. Okay, projected. Okay. Just a second. Okay, is this loud enough? Okay. I think I'll jump into the analysis right away. I would start by thanking everybody, the Corps engineers, the APC, the citizens of Lafayette. I recognize a lot of them here, and Rachel definitely for all the support she provided. Like Mark said, this actually study we conducted, or we started working on it in 2016 after the flood. Monique would remember the many discussions we had here and at UL, Mr. Shuffler and Dave Dixon, we visited several times together about just flooding issues in Lafayette in general. And, you know, we invested in this model over the last 2 or 3 years. I would recognize Haitham. He's with our research team at UL, and he's really a big help for this study. And I also acknowledge other members from UL that are not here that contributed to the study. So like I said, we started working on this for about 2 or 3 years now, and it was the intention was to answer some science questions that we are interested at UL, some research questions related to flooding in the Vermilion River. This is a very challenging river to work with. We all know the complexity in terms of the hydrology and how water flows in general. It was manifested in 2016 by the extreme flooding that happened. Not only that, but the complex reverse flows that we all witnessed, the long durations of flooding that after the rain, we all know how long it stayed in 2016 after the rain has concluded. So we were motivated by just trying to understand what's going on in the watershed, why the flow flows in that way, what are the dynamics that control the flow, and of course the implications here is how can we manage the watershed, but we need to understand it first to be able to answer these questions. Before we start proposing solutions or testing them, we need to understand the watershed and make sure that we have a good grasp on how the water moves in the watershed. So that's what motivated our study. And when the issue of dredging the Vermilion came about, the model, became as a useful tool for that. And I thank the Corps and the audience here for giving us the opportunity at UL to show how our science and our research can actually serve the community. That's how we look at it. The study, okay, I'm going to try to walk you through how we built the model, right? And maybe that will help answer some of the questions that Pam put out. And I'll let Jeff present some of the results after I finish my segment here. So the model here is, you can see that it actually covers the entire watershed of Vermilion River. So it goes all the way from the headwaters by Fusilier, as you can see it here. And it covers all the way until, this is the main stem of the river, goes all the way until the bay, right? So we had to capture all of that to be able to, just like Monique said, you cannot answer, this is a regional project, so you have to have a regional model to be able to look at the impact. Otherwise, you'll be blinded by what you are not looking at. So you can recognize some of the features here that are important to the model. By Fusilier here, that brings water from the Teche, Roos Canal, that brings also water from the Teche. The boundary conditions we have at the bottom here is the Vermilion Bay. And these are some of the USGS stations that measure flow and water levels. So we use those to calibrate and validate the model. The model is a tool or a tool that you build and you train it to reproduce reality. So you have to calibrate and validate the model before you actually start using it. So if you have some observations, you can test the model against the observations, establish some credibility before you can use it as a hypothesis testing tool. These are, the Vermilion River is a big watershed. There's a lot of tributaries. That's what Pam was talking about. There's a lot of tributaries that feed into the Vermilion River. These are some of the major ones. You may recognize some of the names here of the watershed, but all of these waresheds bring water to Vermilion, so we had to build those into the model. This is the large swamp area, so we also have that in the model represented. It plays a big role in determining flood dynamics in the area. So all the tributaries, the major tributaries that contribute to Vermilion River in Lafayette Parish were actually included in the model. So they were modeled. So in that sense, we could actually look at how reduction in the tailwater condition in the Vermilion River propagate into the tributaries. So to answer Pam's question, yes, we were able to actually look at also those, not every tributary, but at least the major ones that are in the Lafayette Parish here. We still included all the runoff that's coming from all the tributaries, but we paid more attention to those major coulees or major tributaries that come to the river. We modeled them explicitly. Okay, so we also, of course, to build the model, you have to represent the topography, the land elevation, the slopes, how water moves is determined by the slopes. We also had to represent the channel cross-section of the river itself. This is an example of how we obtained all the LiDAR data, very high resolution LiDAR data. And we merged that with cross-sectional surveys, actual field surveys from the river. You can see how we were able to capture the entirety of the river and the floodplain to a long distance around the river. This is an example of how you can actually modify the cross-section of the river to test dredging, right? So this is an example of taking the cross-section of the river and widening it and deepening it to represent dredging scenarios. So with this kind of setup, you can actually test any dredging scenario that you want along the entire river from the headwaters to the Vermilion Bay. Another feature here is that we were able, like I said, to represent all the major tributaries that bring water to the Vermilion River, model them explicitly. We had to build a lot of geometry in the model, right? So you can see some numbers. We have about 2,000 plus surveyed river cross sections along the river. We have about 500,000 or more computational points along the model domain. These are, some of them are, without getting into details, but it's really quite involved and detailed model that captures the major features and complexity of flow interaction between the river and the swamp. I'll show that in a minute. We also have, I think, Rachel or somebody earlier talked about hydraulic structures. There are key structures that Vermilion freshwater district operates. The Roos Canal, the biofusillage. So we had to actually include these in the models to operate and simulate how much water is coming and how it impacts the river. So with this kind of feature, you can actually test the impact of these structures. I know there are some of the ideas on, can we lower the river ahead of storms? We can test that actually because we have those structures already included in the model. The bridges play a major role in flooding also and controlling the water surface elevation. So we have those in the model, very detailed representation of bridges. The major bridges, there are so many of them, right? So we included the major ones that can play a role. So again, there is some discussion on how some of these bridges actually contribute to flooding. And we can also, this kind of setup allows you to actually to test the impact of those bridges or how you can improve some of the bridges. The swamp, right? It's a big factor in how water flows in the river. It's responsible for a lot of the reverse flow that we see. So our model includes that. It's very detailed representation of the swamp. What you can see here, these are the computational nodes. That's how the model calculates how the water moves. We're talking here about less than a meter or less than a foot, depending on where you are, of tracking how the water moves. You can see here that the symmetry or the topography of the land. This is inside the swamp as the river goes into the swamp, right? That's this part here. So that's where the river starts to interact with the swamp. So we have a very detailed representation of that and how the river spills water into the swamp and how the swamp feeds the river back. You can recognize some of the spoil banks. I know this is something that Dave and Harold have been talking about. Those spoil banks that sit around the river. We are talking with LCG on how we can actually test these things. So the model allows you to go and shave those things, and basically you can test how much that would impact the flooding in the area. So the lake is represented, Lake Martin. The swamp is represented with all the topography and the ditches and the spoil banks and all that. So it's all represented there.
We're going to make a quick switch from Zoom for those participating online so they can see it.
Yeah, sure. So if you can navigate to the Zoom call, you'll have to hit escape. Zoom. The bottom share screen.
Right here. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll minimize that. So again, is this the full screen? Or?
If you go to slideshow at the top, or yep, that works.
Oh. So again, I'm not going to skip some of the details, but we can also represent the different types of vegetation, whether it's a swamp, whether it's a forest, whether it's urban land, because that also can impact how water flows in the watershed. These are some of the storms that we tested the model with, or what we actually tested dredging with. We wanted to test the dredging and any analysis actually with real storms, not those hypothetical storms, again, for the same reason that Pam talked about. The river is complicated, and sometimes if you use those idealized storms, you may not get the right representation. So we picked two storms, one that happened in 2014. It's a long period of about 2 to 3 weeks, and we received about, anywhere from, 2 to 3 inches until about 12 inches. And this is classified as about from anywhere between 2 to 10 years storm. And we also picked the infamous 2016 flood, because that's just another end of the spectrum there. So this represents about 100 years or more, depending on how much, how you look at the storm. So we ran the model with these two storms. So whether it's the existing condition before dredging and after dredging, we would run the model with the two storms and look at the difference between the flood water, the water elevation under different storm conditions. What can you get out of the model? And I'm going to try to finish soon so we can have time for the results and the discussions. You can get a typical, what's the water surface profile along the river. So what you see here is a profile of the river, the entire river going from Bayou Fusilier, all the headwaters, all the way to the Gulf. That's basically about 70 or so miles here. And this is the symmetry of the bottom of the river. And this is the elevation of the water, right? So this was due to 2016. And you can recognize here, this was about, the river peaked at 16 feet or so. So the model was actually able to reproduce what happened during that storm. Those of you who looked carefully at the river and how it behaves, you can see here almost like a hump in the river. That's when the river flows north. So we were very happy to see that the model actually was able to do that. And you can also look inside the tributaries and extract the water surface profile along the tributary also. So this is one of the tributaries here, and we can do the same thing for all the tributaries. So you can look at the water surface profile along the main channel of the river and along the tributaries, and you can tell how high or low the water can go. You can see also here, I would comment on the bathymetry of the river. The river up from this point here has a good slope, right? But right here in the area where this is Lafayette, basically, I know the font is a little too small, but that's basically where Lafayette is. This is where the coulee mean is and rotary point. You can recognize some shoaling here in the bathymetry of the river. You can also see that the river here is quite flat. In this particular area, is quite flat. And that's where actually a lot of tributaries come into the river. As we have this very flat topography in the river is quite flat there. And you have all these 5, 6 major tributaries that bring so much water into the river at the same time. And that you can think about it like the river gets overwhelmed or gets confused on where the water can go because it doesn't have slope. So that's when the water starts to go north and south, and we see these complex phenomena. But the flatness of the river here and the amount of flows that come into the river all at the same time, that's really what causes flooding in the period we have here. So this is an example of what the model can produce you. It can give you. It also can give you flow rates, how much water is traveling through the river at any point in the river, at any point in the tributaries. So we can track how much each of the tributaries are bringing into the watershed. I would make a comment here. This here is the black line is basically what goes into the river itself. You can see the reverse flow. You can see the magnitude here. And some of these lines here, the blue and the red, is what's coming from tributaries like LWI and Coulimin. And you can see how comparable the magnitude of the flow that comes from Coulimin and LWI to what happens in the river itself. And you can see also how they are like synchronized, right? So you have all these tributaries hitting the river at the same time, and they overwhelm the channel of the river. You can also, this is some of the calibration and validation we did, how the model was able to reproduce the storms. We actually calibrated the model for 3 storms, 2016, 14, and 16, and the results were quite satisfactory, actually. You can also, once you have the model developed, you can also look at inundation, right? Where is the flooded area? So this is an example of how the model can provide inundation maps. You can superimpose them on top of structures, and you can figure out which structures are flooded and which are not. And that's how we were able to look at some of the results that Jeff will share later. This is also an example of what diagnostic tools that the model can actually show you. I'll play a movie really quick here to show you the kind of analysis that you can do with the model, or at least the tools that you can use. So hopefully this will work. So this is the model here. You can see the model can actually depict for you how the water moves between the river and the swamp. You can see all the details here. And it gives you an explanation now of how the water moves. And it might give you some clues on where you can go and fix things. So better understanding of the dynamics of the river, right? But also tool to tell you where intervention might help or may not help, right? This is again the river, this is the swamp, and that's how the water is actually moving. I have another snippet here of a closer look in the, let's see from here. Okay, this is a closer look at how the river actually interacts with the swamp. This is the river going through the swamp itself. This is the river going through the swamp. And you can see how the river actually is spilling water to the swamp, and how the water coming from this part here in the swamp going back to the river. You can see how the river actually is flowing north here, and it's moving towards north into the swamp itself. Another one here that is kind of large scale, I think. Right. So this is just the overall. I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but you can. This is fully at the time, and you can see a split. I don't know if you can spy it from here. You can see a split where the river starts to flow north from here, and it starts to flow south from here. And swamp here acts as a big giant detention that's sitting to absorb that water and release it back to the river. So a very complicated system, but with tools like that, you can actually develop a better understanding and also a better management strategy where you can figure out the solutions and verify them and refine them beyond just the concept that you may have in our heads. I think I'm gonna, right, so these are some of the, I'll head into Jeff now, but I think Monique was talking about with models like that, you can look at a suite of solutions, and Mark alluded to that. So these are some of the things that we can look at with tools like that, whether it's dredging the river, like we're going to talk about today. We can look at how you manage the swamp because it's already represented in the model. We can how to increase the capacity of the swamp, how can we remove spoil banks and what have you. We can look at detention because we have all the tributaries. Maybe we can have large detention basins that can capture a lot of water, or maybe you can look at a small series of small detentions that are spread out the watershed that can actually provide better benefit than those massive detention that you may not have land for. Managing the control structures, how can we, for emergency preparedness and so forth, how can we control those structures? And LCG engineers were telling me that there's a lot of opportunities in the north of I-10 for detention that we are not looking at, so we can probably start looking in that direction too, because there's a lot of available land up north of I-10 there. So I think with that, I'll more slides, but I think I'll stop here and turn it to Jeff.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to check to see if that was going to be accurate or not. Thank you, Congressman Higgins, once again. It's good to be back. I know that we didn't initially think it would take this long to get back together. So we do appreciate LWI, Dr. Habib especially, really a treasure. I kind of questioned my degree choice when I spent time with Dr. Habib. So it's been excellent working with him. So I'll be pretty brief. We did previously release our findings through Congressman Higgins' office. Not too much change, I just do want to elaborate on a few points here. We thought that it would be good, one, to take everyone through Dr. Habib's model first and how it's put together to give you the same sort of comfort and confidence that we at the Corps have in the model. Mark has already kind of hit the high points, the salient points about where we've landed at this and where we're going. I just have some illustrative things for you as far as the findings go to kind of reiterate what you've heard. I am glad. I'm only going to be presenting on the 2016 flood findings, but Pam, to your question, I think if you saw in there, the other scenario that we had Dr. Habib run, in addition to running 2 dredge scenarios, we ran 2 storm scenarios, the 100-year, which was the 2016, and we also ran a more frequent event, the 2014 10-year event. So we looked at that, and I think, at least for us in the building at the Corps, more than expected, there is still an impact. Some lowering of the Vermilion for the 2014 event, the more frequent, but it is less than the 2016. So really what I'm going to present to you here today is the 2016 event and the maximum water surface elevation reduction, what we saw from that, and then kind of touch upon what that would mean. Although Mark has already done a really good job of laying it out. And I was going to talk about the original scope, but I feel like that would be redundant because Mark went into detail about how we got to this point. So we were very lucky and fortunate, as Mark said, that ULL had structure count and they were able to do a lot of the plotting of the coulees because really when we approached ULL, when we knew that they had this model, we really would have just been focusing on the Vermilion River and the effects of the Vermilion River. So it's by their perseverance and their work at ULL that we're able to even present as much as we have because it's certainly kind of fortuitous that ULL had all this information. So with that, I'll just kind of jump right in. So the findings. So you saw Dr. Habib in the lower right hand in one of the slides he showed. There was the bathymetry of the river, and then there's what the Corps authorized the dredge to. It's really, and that's actually depicted right up here in the box, the top box. It's 9 feet, and then we do a little bit of over dredge. So it's 11 feet deep by 100 feet wide. So we carried that dimension in the model all the way through down to the end of the model at mile 0. So that's what it's based on. And so anything that came out of the channel, when you put that through, that's the cubic yards. So when we say on the full dredge scenario, we remove 4 million cubic yards. It's sort of like when we talk about CFS on rivers, cubic feet per second. It's hard to visualize until somebody says how fast it can fill the Superdome or an Olympic swimming pool. And I'm sure by now you all have probably read this, what 4 million cubic yards actually would be if you stored it in the Cajun Dome. It would be 5.5 Cajun Domes filled completely, right? So when Mark discussed the need for land, that's what we're talking about. If we dredge the Vermilion, we would need a lot of land to put this much material on before we take it back. And that's really what drives up the cost. There's some other things that go into dredging. Some people might say, well, in the Mississippi River, you get it out at $3, $4, $5 a cubic yard. Well, it's true on the Mississippi River. It's a super highway, a lot of depth. It's very wide. We can do all kinds of work out there. On the Vermilion, it's shallow. We'd have to float barges in. We'd probably have to transfer it then to trucks. We'd have to truck it to wherever it's going. So it drives the cubic yard cost up. So when you heard Mark mention 50 million, 150 million, we don't know exactly how much it costs because one, we don't know where it's going. Two, we don't know what's in it. There's a lot of factors. So we give kind of a sweep or a range. We don't know exactly how much it costs, just that it would be, I wouldn't say price prohibitive, but it's a cost that makes your eyes kind of pop open when you hear it because it's a very large cost. So, and then on the 2016 event here at the bottom, the maximum elevation reduction we saw was about 1 foot. The average is closer to about 0.7 of a foot. And in fact, that's not in every place on the river. It's not a uniform reduction in water surface elevation. It doesn't mean 1 foot across the entire Vermilion. It's only in certain places, and in fact, the maximum is only 1 foot. And if you average it out across the entire Vermilion, it's like 0.7 of a foot. But Pam, to your comment earlier, it's well taken. A half foot could mean something, and it does, but only for a certain amount of structures. The Vermilion, I think, Dr. Beaver, you and I have talked about it, is largely within its banks. So a half-foot reduction is really just talking about water that's already inside the banks of the Vermilion. It's not that it's in neighborhoods. It's not spilling out in the neighborhoods. Let me go ahead and advance here real quick. And that's kind of to the point of this. And I remember the first time I showed this to Mark, Mark said, well, what the hell's going on here, Jeff, in this? What are you even showing me? And I'm like, well, I don't understand why you don't get it. And then I was like, well, now I know why I don't get it. Because it's very, very hard to see the difference between the blue shaded area is the profile in the no dredging scenario. Let's just focus there on the left for a second. Yeah. Yes.
If you don't mind, I need to make an adjustment.
Yeah, of course, please. We weren't sharing the full screen, were we? We were sharing the other screen.
PowerPoint specifically, but we need to share.
Oh, yeah.
It should be at the top, I think.
I apologize to everybody on the Zoom call. Our graphics aren't as good as ULO's. In fact, this is ULO's graphics.
That's where we are, correct?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Let me go ahead and full screen.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no, it's okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so as I was saying, I don't believe the Zoom call will be able to see this. I just want to point out what the difference is, and luckily it's at the lower point. So we'll walk out here. So if you see in the no dredging, you can see this little like cut right here where you see the blue kind of come up, okay? If you follow me over here, you see it modified just a little bit. That's the kind of reduction that we're talking about. It's very small reduction. So trust me, I think that this is not exactly what we would have liked to have presented to you, but this is where the science brought us. Is that, yes, you can dredge the Vermilion. Yes, you can lower the water surface elevation, but it doesn't generally do that much to the water surface profile of the channel. And so then to hit the structure count, so this was not really a part of the original scope. So that's why I keep going back to the original scope. We were fortunate that Dr. Habib and his staff at ULL were able to, they had a structure inventory, and we were able to look at the differential between no dredging and a full dredging scenario and the partial. You can see that pretty close actually. And look to see what structures had that blue on them, both on the no dredging scenario, and then if they no longer had blue on them in the full dredging scenario, they were removed from the flooding. So you can see all said and done in St. Landry and St. Martin, 0, right? The 2016 storm, how many were impacted, at least in the model. And I know that there's some discrepancy between FEMA claims and what the model's showing. I understand that there can be multiple claims out of place. There can be, a lot of you get it. I see a lot of parish presidents here. I think you all understand that. It's just, we did the structure count for this. So it may not match up exactly with what was reported from FEMA, but it's a very good tool to see what's going on here. In any case, so the main takeaway is that under a full dredging scenario, a total of 327 out of 6,325 flood structures, if we had had the Vermilion dredged, would have been out of that floodplain at that time. So that's the main takeaway. Again, it wasn't really something that we set out to do when we investigated this. We really wanted to answer Vermilion, are we going to put water on you? If we were to dredge up, well, really, if we dredge the whole channel, is that going to increase your water levels and flood more people than already are being flooded under ordinary circumstances. So with that, that's really the high points of the findings. I do want to talk just a little bit about where we are with the report. We were a little delayed by COVID, both us and ULL, as you might imagine. But we are going to review for the final time, and not to say that the report hasn't already reviewed it. We've reviewed concurrently with ULL, so we're fully behind the findings. That's not going to change. But the report has to be dolled up and made to look good. So it's going to come in for final review, I believe, next week, Dr. Habib. And it will be ready for publication. We'll get it up on an outward-facing site so we can distribute it. So I'll work that with LWI and Congressman Piggins' office, of course with Mark, and we'll make sure that everybody can get a copy of it. I know I talked to some folks already in the hall outside about that, but please feel free to reach out to me, Board of Engineers, if you want a status, but it will be coming soon. We've already checked out with ULL. So with that, I believe that is our presentation, Monique. So I think if you want to take it over from here. Oh, I'm sorry, I do want to hit the other bullet. So Monique intimated that the Corps is partnering. So we're in the middle of drafting what's called a memorandum of understanding with the Louisiana Watershed initiative. And the reason why I bring that up here in this forum, if you don't already know about it, so been in discussion with Pat Forbes at OCD, LWI. Sorry, it's a lot of acronyms. And a memorandum, a memorandum of understanding, which essentially, while it doesn't commit resources, it does commit our participation with LWI, that we're going to share models that we, the Corps, have created, anything that we've done to help save money for the state of Louisiana. And it's symbiotic because the state of Louisiana is going to develop all these great watershed models. And eventually the Corps is going to do a federal feasibility study, whether it's in Acadiana or anywhere in the state. We plan to use that model at the back end, which would save the federal taxpayer the purse of Congress. We believe that's going to save money. So we're in the midst of that. We're also investigating some actions to partner formally via monetary means with LWI. And we think we have an inroad there. The board has some special authority. It's called the Chiefs Economy Act. So we're looking to partner with LWI both in spirit, which is the memorandum of understanding, and also through a real agreement that would give money to the Corps to have our modelers working hand in hand with the modelers that you're going to spend a lot of money on for a watershed model. So just know that the Corps is going to be with you as we go forward. As Mark said, it's sort of a pivot towards LWI now because we know dredging is something, but we don't think it's everything. And so there's obviously a flood problem, and I think that's where LWI is going. That's what their charge is. So with that, Monique, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dr. Habib. This is, I guess, the forefront of the work of this committee, right? It's really, once we get a full model for the entire watershed, we can take an inventory, like we said earlier, and flush it through here, really look at solutions and tweak solutions and look at them differently. And really, I think in the long run, spend less money and have greater impacts than the way we manage our waterways today, which is really the whole point of all of this, right? It's become much more effective to be smarter with the money, the limited money that we do have, I will say that. With that, I will open it up to questions. Okay, from the committee, any questions or thoughts?
Okay, well, as you said, thank you very much to Mr. Wingate, Mr. Jeffries. Special thanks to Dr. Habib and Congressman Higgins for finding the funding in ULL. We will open up to public comments at this time. I'd like to remind the public that we are limiting comments to 3 minutes. If you are representing an organization, please state that for the record so that we can know who you represent. First one with comments, and also, Kate, do we have any comments from the public online? So you'll be checking on that while we do this.
We don't have any for this series.
None.
No.
Okay. All right. So with that said, I'll call on Mr. Dave Dixon for comment.
Yeah, my name is Dave Dixon. I'm the president of Dredging Vermilion. It's a nonprofit dedicated to solving our regional drainage and flooding issues. And we've been studying this thing for a long, long time. And I'll second what Mark said about, dredging the river is not a magic bullet, a silver bullet that's going to fix fix all our problems. In fact, we developed a whole list of projects, which was reviewed with President Lafayette Parish, Josh Gilry, last week. Was given to APC this week to be included in the master list of projects for y'all to consider. But I do have a couple comments regarding a couple dredging estimates and dredging projects, and this would be addressed to Mark. Okay, Mark wrote a report after the '93 flood. It was written in '95. Sorry, and it was to look at dredging the river all the way from I-10, River Mile 62, all the way down to I think the Intercoastal Waterway. It was like quite a few miles, and the estimated construction cost was $30 million. And this was a much larger project because the channel size was dramatically increased. In fact, it was almost double. So that's my first question. But the disparity in the cost estimate today versus the cost estimate in 1995. I realize there's been inflation and all that, but this estimate for 95 was a much larger project. The second thing was there was a project that was done in 98. It was, I think the Corps did this, and they did a spot dredge in Lafayette. And it was only like a mile or so to remove some soil. And the contract was $489,263. One of the first things we did when we started studying this problem is that we looked at the long-term flooding of 12-foot flood events on the Vermilion River, which started to increase in 1970. Okay, after they did this spot dredge project, this one little project for $489,000, that trend line flatlined for 15 years, and then it took off again going north. Okay, going. So there are some solutions we do believe that can be looked at. That may not encompass spending whatever millions it is to dredge the whole river, and we need to move very promptly, quickly as we can on those solutions, because we're in the danger zone. Last year we had 5 12-foot flood events, where from 1940 to 1980 we only had a total of 11. So that's my comment. Mark, would you address the?
Yeah, it's a good question from that 95 reconnaissance report. I don't recall that plan dredging from Lafayette down to the GIWW, I think you said, Mr. Dixon. What I do recall, that $30 million, so truly I just don't recall that piece. What I do recall was the conclusions of that study, which we looked at many things, but ultimately what we came away with and what we were looking at is potentially some dredging near the Bayou Tortue Swamp. That's what we were calling it back then. I guess it's now Cypress Island Swamp, but some dredging very close to that swamp to facilitate flow into that swamp. That's what I recall being ultimately the preferred plan. So I don't recall a plan going all the way to the GIWW. I just don't recall the volume, so I can't really make a comparison between the cost back then and the cost, with what we're proposing here today. I will tell you, Jeff brings up a good point. Look, when we dredge almost daily on the Mississippi River, and a least cost plan is usually about $4 to $5 a cubic yard to dredge. But that's where we have a dredge in the river and it's pumping material pretty close to the river. That's not what we're talking about here. In fact, what we're talking about is cleaning up the Vermilion River and putting this material as, we really haven't looked at how you remove the material. What we looked at was to determine if we dredge the river, would there be positive and negative impacts? But I can tell you from the 98 event, we're talking about barging material. We're talking potentially putting it on a truck. We're talking disposal areas. It's just not the same comparison. So it wouldn't surprise me if you're $15 to $20 a cubic yard higher than that. But I'm just ballparking numbers, and that's what we wanted to bring to the team here, is that if you wanted to proceed with a 4 million cubic yard, it's a considerable amount of money. And I think that from the engineering perspective, you have to look for other solutions. And I think the Bayou Tortue Swamp is a piece of that. And I think there's other ideas as well that need to be looked at. I will tell you also, I do recall at the time we were working closely with Lafayette Parish Consolidated Government. Bill Campbell was there in the 90s, and he had reported at the time when we did do that modest dredging, he seemed to think anecdotally there were some benefits there. I don't know if I've ever seen data to show that, but anecdotally he thought he saw the river performing a little better.
It absolutely did. I mean, I lived
You're
across the street
right.
on the river.
That's why I've been while I was working with Robert at the time too.
It made a big difference.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Mr. Chairman, that's the only thing I just wanted to emphasize. You know, Mark, you said the key word right there, anecdotally. We're here as a steering committee and want to take a look at the good hard science. I think UL has brought volumes to this study because you would have not, under the generous funding that we had from the congressman, you would not have had these results. You couldn't even approach to saying what we said this morning. So I really want to thank UL and the cooperation that they've done and brought so much more meaning to this project and viable solutions, that it is not one silver bullet that's going to take care of this problem. It's going to be a multiple silver bullets. Also, what this committee will do and what we need to form on is that we're not going to look at just what affects one parish, one subdivision, or one house. We need to take a look at the watershed as a whole, and what is so maybe beneficial to one subdivision is a detriment to the whole watershed. Those things need to be in consideration. Not that that won't be done, but it has to be looked at as a whole and not one individual project.
Mr. Reacher.
Yes, Mark, the Corps of Engineers, are you responsible for getting notarized certificates before anything is done? Like we are doing the kind of dredging?
Are you referring to President from an environmental standpoint?
Yeah, I'm talking about it's going to have an impact on someone else in a negative way. Are you responsible for getting notarized certificates?
I'm not familiar with notarized certificates.
Notarized.
Oh, notarized.
If it's in a floodway.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Guess my ears are getting a little bit older. Certainly, when we do things, we do not want to have any negative impact. And that is why we wanted to do this analysis. So that is the intent, that we would do no harm to any group. And if we were to, and we were to recognize in the results, then we would have to try to mitigate for that. So that's how I would answer. It is the intent to certainly do no harm, no negative impact to downstream communities or upstream communities.
Okay, thank you.
Not on any other public comment.
Yes, I have several more, and please remember we're under a tight time frame, so please limit your discussion to 3 minutes. Next, we have Mr. Jeremiah Suttle.
Thank you all. Appreciate everybody having this meeting. Fine day. Appreciate you coming down. And Congressman Davis, thank you so much. I live on the river, and I've been on the river for the last 25 plus years, and I can say anecdotally that it is getting worse. The river is rising more with less rain. Now, whatever's causing that, we need. I think Dave and Harold with Dredging Vermilion has done a lot of work on this. They have, I think, some good ideas, and but I can tell you that I flooded in 2016. Nothing has been done, and it's just getting worse. Developments are being built that there's no impact studies done on these developments as to how it affects the people that live on the river. You probably have 800 to 1,000 dwellings on the river. They will all tell you the same thing. It's getting worse. Nothing has been done since 2016, and I realize government moves slow, but this, from a point of view of I don't know what the legalities with regards to actions by the parish or the cities or individual developments. I don't know what the legalities are to put water into other people's houses by their actions, but I can tell you, if it's not illegal, it certainly is immoral. I would like for you guys to do what you have to do to get with Harold and Dave, talk to them, listen to them. Pam Grange has done a lot of work, and thank you, Pam, for all you've done. We really appreciate that. But that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
All right, next we have Mr. Jeffrey Winter.
My name is Jeffrey Swenson. Live across the street from the river, and I was a victim of the 2016 flood. Dr. B, thank you for your time and today, and Mr. Wingate, and certainly Congressman Higgins. One thing is for sure, if nothing's done, everybody that flooded in 16 is going to flood again. That's just a fact. The Corps felt as though it was providing a benefit in 98 when they did a spot dredge, and it certainly helped. If they did it then, I don't understand why they wouldn't do it now. I mean, the cost may be up somewhat, but it can't be up that much. Dr. B, when you said that you had done the modeling, did you include, and you said you had included all of the coulees, did you include the Youngsville, Broussard area in your modeling? Or did you just look at, say, Coulee Mean and Coulee Ildacon and some area up there? I mean, and the reason I'm asking this question is, you know, models is only as good as the data that you put in. Not saying anything negative about this, but I mean, number of inches that it rains in a certain time period and how many days it rains. All of those different variables go into a model to make a determination. But did you include the areas in Broussard and Youngsville?
And for the sake of time, if you have any other questions, go ahead and submit them right now, and then
Okay.
we'll address them.
No, that was my main question, just as if it was the whole area or just the Vermilion River and Coulee Mean in Ildacon.
Yeah, it's you can see those this part here that's the closest we have to Youngsville, and this part here where Coulee LaSalle is. So all of this is modeled into the model. And to answer your question also about the rainfall, yes, we would take the entire storm. It's not just a snapshot of the
Right. Okay. Well, because of time, I did have some other comments. I just, you know, would think that it's imperative, probably the quickest and easiest thing from my perspective, and knowing what I do know, certainly opening up the breaches going into Cypress Island Swamp would certainly help, as well as some topping, you know, take off the high.
we can test that with the model easily because we have it built there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Next we have Kate Daga.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I own a KN out of business and I was affected by the 2016 flood. Dredging the river, I believe will help with flooding, but I believe will also help with being able to get larger boats up the river. We work on those that currently I can't do work on because I can't trade off to us. But that could help with commercial business. That's what I think. Thank y'all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. And last one I have is Rainey, and I won't even attempt the last name. Redmond? All right. Mr. Rainey Redmond.
My name's Rainey Redmond. I have Redmond's Marine here in Lafayette. We're a boat sales and service. And we did at one time bring big boats from Sycamore Point up the river, pull them out on our land and perform services on them. And now we can't even take 40 boards, not hit mud. So we've been flooded from the flood. Last year I had to move all my product 3 times because of potential water coming up. And the situation with when the water does go down, can't get through the river with boats, because you get in mud. So the river is silted up pretty bad. So we do need to do something to get the river to go. I think if you dredged it, you get a better flow, get the water out also. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the cards I have. Mr. Scheffler, would you like to say something?
Thank you all for being here, tackling a tough problem. We dealt with this quite a bit, and what happened during Hurricane Barry was an example of how working with Desperately, working with St. Anne Parish, gate open, Henderson gate open. We could accommodate floodwater. We drained Cypress Island to the lowest it's probably been in 35 years. Lake Shallow was totally dry. Thousands of birds were there feeding. So we were fighting a storm surge. We're fighting a very high Chapel River, which allowed very limited amount of water to go into Henderson. And high rainfall. The rainfall above St. Andrews and North St. Andrews was much greater in Barry than it was during 2016. And because we were successful in lowering Cypress Island to dry, and then the swamps above Catawba, we drained 2 to 3 feet, which gave us enormous storage for when the flood came. Predicted level at Washington, based on the rainfall during the USGS, was 34 feet. It actually came to 28.1. At 34 feet, it would flood lots of homes, lots of even, the tourist center at Opelousas would have gone on. So that's an example of taking some action and made a hell of a difference. The model probably didn't deal with one of our big issues in duration. How long the state flooded? Perry drained back to flood stage during 2016 in 4.5 days. It took Lafayette 30 days to get back to flood stage. The timing, the flood events that occurred in Lafayette, most of the homes that were flooded in Lafayette were during the high rainfall event. Homes above Lafayette, it was 2 to 3 days later that they flooded. Farms in the Balls Parish. One farmer we interviewed had 14 inches of rain in his rain gauge. He was high dry. 3 days later, he's 4 feet underwater. That's telling you our system cannot pass the flood. It's too restricted, too confined. And so this is far beyond what's happening in Lafayette. A flooded Cypress Island, Wacaderia Parish, St. Holton Parish, St. Landry Parish, Vermilion Parish. We haven't dredged a Vermilion, but we've dredged that hell out of every coulee around. We've turned them to concrete. We've made canals out of Early Cane. We've raised these water levels to astronomical levels compared to the history. I have the catalogs from 79 and 83, and I looked at the difference between Surrey Bridge and Broussard, about 7 miles apart. Every day looking at it, there was no time that Broussard was higher than Surrey Bridge. In the 2016 event, Broussard was almost 5 feet high, 4.9 feet high than Surrey Bridge. That's what flooded the hell out of home. We have this bulge water. We dredged all the coolers, turned them into concrete. We had this massive amount of water racing at 6, 7 miles an hour. That's our measurements. The us moving at 1 mile an hour. Not only is it flooding, but it's carrying all the sediment and filling.
Dr. Habib has a comment for you.
Yes. If I may, I fully agree with you, Mr. Scheffler, that this is a much bigger problem than the river. And I really, if there's one thing I learned from this exercise, is that we need to look beyond the river. The river, it's a channel, right? And if you look at the profile here, the river here is very flat, right? By dredging, you can make that channel bigger, but you're not going to make it steeper because you just don't have the economics, right? So you're going to make the channel bigger. Okay, that's great, but that bigger channel will be filled with the rain in no time. I calculated how much rain, 1 inch of rain over the entire watershed is equivalent to 52 million cubic yards. 1 inch of rain. Of course, that doesn't all go to the river, but it just gives you a scale of, 1 inch of rain, 52 million cubic yards. And here with dredging in the entire river, we got 4 million cubic yards. So you can do the math. What I really learned from this also is you can look here at this particular part where you actually say that this is where flooding happens. And I agree. Look at the water surface profile. It's very flat. It's very flat. Rivers do not do that in typical conditions. And what's happening here, you have all this water coming to the river at the same time. And even if you make the channel bigger, the channel will get overwhelmed really quickly. The viable solution for me really here is how do we get water out of the river? Not, that's what's going to make a difference. Like you said, we don't want to keep pushing water to the river. We want to hold that water by detention, maybe by diverting the water to the swamp, to somewhere else. But fixing the river itself is very useful for navigation. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's needed for that. But you are bounded by the Gulf, right? I talk with Mr. Derek Ellison all the time. The Gulf sometimes acts as a boundary that you cannot drain, even if you make the channel bigger. The slope is a slope. So the main solution really for me is, again, let's hold some of the water out. And we did some analysis, maybe I can show it to you later, where we turn off some of the coolies. Hytham, he's doing his research. If we shut down one of the coolies, just hypothetically, we drop the river by 1.7 foot. Right? So that just gives you a scale of, what's the impact of those tributaries, and we need to hold the water before this. Build the car.
Okay. Copy. Out of respect for Congressman's time, we'd like to give him a few minutes to make some final comments.
Thank you, sir. It's quite clear that there are many questions that are driven by common sense, and what we're hearing referred to as anecdotal evidence. That's the observations of intelligent American men and women that live along the river. To me, from a common sense point of view, this is very close to a scientific observation when you have a preponderance of anecdotal observation and historical comparison. So I think that the wisdoms of our community are sufficient to provide the right questions that can be modeled because of your 500,000 data points you have on your existing model. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from our February disclosures and our studies since then in meetings, and today you've confirmed you have basically 500,000 data points that can be changed to reflect if this was done or if that was done, et cetera, regarding any form of water management that impacts our entire community and the entire region. So I think the observations of the folks that have been around for quite some time and live on the river, I think this should be modeled through the data points that we currently have, so we can get solid answers to these observations. Further, I think it's hard to get your head wrapped around, again, from a common sense perspective, that if you dredge the Vermilion, it doesn't do any good. It's just hard to get your head wrapped around that. And we have been through many, many meetings, hundreds of hours of meetings with extensive explanations of this, and I accept that. However, as you speak of retention, it seems to me that if we lived in a world where funding was not an issue, and we could dredge the Vermilion to its intended parameters from one end to the other, all the way to the bay, to the Gulf, essentially, then it seems to me that the Vermilion itself becomes a long retention area for water. And if you combine that with an intelligent assessment of incoming water, whether that be storm surge or rain events or water from up north. If you combine some level of dredging, whether it's spot dredging here or there or full dredging, I leave that to the scientists and the local officials to determine. But if you combine some level of dredging that we could perhaps find a way to afford with the intelligent use of our existing water management structures, like prior to Barry, wasn't it? We used engineering structures at Cortabla and Tesh that effectively lowered the Vermilion River quite a bit. Now that worked because we did not have a storm surge and we did not have water from up north during the rain event. But this is the kind of flexibility, I believe, that if we come together as a community and a state and answer every question using the model that we have and the 500,000 data points and respond to the anecdotal observations of historical experiences on the river, get those questions answered so that we can, from the totality of circumstance, we can make the right decisions based upon what water event we're looking at and what the dynamics are to the south and to the north, and what structures can be manipulated, opened or closed, be they closing a coulee or opening a gate or closing a gate, etc. These decisions can be made fast, and the state has to have the authority, local government has to have the authority in the communications to make these decisions fast based upon the water events that we're actually looking at in the future. So I'm encouraging cleaning the bridges. We must get the bridges cleaned. It makes no sense to have a bridge that has an intended passage of water and flow, but it's blocked off by debris that has to be cleaned. So I think some very salient points have been touched on today. Again, I apologize that I do have a hard exit if I'm to catch my plane, and I have a meeting with some of my colleagues this evening to address some things on a national level. They'll be very upset if I miss my plane. So I'm uplifted by this gathering, and I thank Ms. Monique for working so closely with our office and the Corps of Engineers, and our community leaders. We remain your partner and at your avail. We're gonna find a way forward, and then whatever it costs, we'll get it done. We'll find a way to get it done. That's my commitment to you from the federal level. And I'm quite sure that we can arrive at these answers and make the right decision. Thank you. Thank you for seeking me next to
Before you leave, yes, sir. I've been sitting quietly and listening all meeting long, and I think Mr. Harris just was commenting about the water and how fast it gets to the river. And I'm a rice farmer by trade. I'm third generation. Yes, sir. And everything that's been done thus far is to get water to the river quicker. We got development in Lafayette, and you're not going to stop that. And also in Vermilion, we've got development. Well, all that agricultural land that used to be agricultural now is development. So the water gets to the river 10 times faster, or you put a number on it, but you got they cemented the coulees in Lafayette. Guess what that did? It got the water off the land quicker to the river. In Vermilion Parish, for the first time in the history of the parish, we've gone from more sugarcane land than rice. And rice land is a big baffle. Every levee is a baffle to hold back the water from getting to the ditches and also to the river. So the whole complex of the area and the topography is flat. So anytime you get the water to the river quicker, you compounding the river from backing up. It creates the river to back up. So everything is changing. The dynamics of the area has been changing with urban development, going from agriculture to development all complicates the problem that we're having. And I know this is not helping, what we're dealing with. It's just a fact. So the reason the river is flooding more often is because it's getting that quick. And we've tried, as the drainage boards in Vermilion, its emphasis is on getting the water off the land, into the tributaries, and into the river. So I just wanted you to hear my comments and observations, but I think it's one of the major issues. And how we're gonna fix that, I think it's gonna have to be a regional approach into restricting some of the water, whether it's retention ponds, whether it's holding back in some areas. But who wants to hold back their water? They all want it off. Nobody wants to fill it. So it's not gonna be an easy fix, but this is a start. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for your points. Obviously, concrete, you lose access from the water to the ground, to the water table. So when you lose agricultural land and replace it with concrete, it's obviously reflective of some development, and they need that water run into the coulees and ultimately into the river. We're talking about the Vermilion River area. So and evaporative qualities, that's a tremendous amount of water that sits on open land will evaporate as you move past the actual rain event. It's a natural course of things. So if you funnel that water into even if you have to control the same amount of water over a much more restricted space, you greatly reduce the dynamic of evaporation of that water. Carol and I have talked about that and others. So it's complex. We don't want to stop business. We don't want to restrict personal freedoms for what you do with your land. I think the retention areas is probably the direction that we're heading. The restrictions of money for dredging because of the difficulty of the dredging. Even if you arrived at and agreed to, well, maybe it doesn't cost this much more, but it will cost this much, but still a lot of incredible amount of mud would have to be moved, and no telling what's in there. There's going to be some hazardous waste in there. The materials have to be dealt with differently than, say, a sand cutter dredge in the Mississippi. They're just displacing that stuff and then pumping it. It's mud. It doesn't have to go through any sort of extensive purification process or remediation. So there are complex questions here, but let me say that my faith is greater than my fear, and the men and women in this room are going to come to the right conclusions. When we get there as a community, my office will be there with required federal funding. We'll work very closely with state and local governments to help you all work together to where we can find a way to afford this thing. And we don't want any homes to flood. None. I live about a quarter mile from the river. I don't live in a nice neighborhood like some of you do. But we're close. It's not a long drive from my neighborhood to your neighborhood. Thank you, guys.
And at this time, I'll turn it over to Rachel to wrap it up and bring us to adjournment.
So just one quick comment. I know today was not a normal occurrence. We are a little ahead in terms of talking about a project before we're actually in the project development, prioritization, classification, and evaluation stage. But I want to thank the committee members for allowing this presentation to occur within this setting. And it just shows you the importance of the collaboration and the significance of what's to come in some of the modeling efforts that will be done within the entire Region 5 watershed. So thank you all for today.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mr. Larry Richard to adjourn.
I second.
Second by Chester Stevens. All in favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned.